originally right, but okay, it says Gregory is recording.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's perfectly good. And we've got the other thing over here, the primary area lines, okay?
Yeah.
And if we go down just a little bit, this is going to be the closest I've come to having something that's completely presentable, like involving telepathy. And what I have now, you can see like about 8 or 10 items down. It says telepathy in recent prehistoric times. Okay, and that's the one we're going to go with. The other thing I've taken down, it's off the system right now. There's a sort of a short take, telepathy in ancient times, short version, right? That's the elevator speech version, sort of.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to click on the line which says telepathy in recent prehistoric times, right?
Okay.
We're going to go to a PDF file, and there's going to be several categories of things, and this is much better organized, but it's still not like 30 minutes worth. It's still going to be longer than that. It might take an hour and a half. I don't know. But it's organized enough that I'm not going to repeat myself or sound like I'm confused or having to read from 3 or 4 different things open on the screen, right? We've got the one file here.
All right. Even if we have to use 2 parts, it's fine.
So
I'd rather it be good than quick.
yeah, this is going to be kind of like making sense of Bible stories 101, right? In recent prehistory. And the first item, there's several items we're going to look at. Okay, it's going to be, areas of evidence which converge together and tell the same story, right? In other words, you have to be able to put 2 and 2 and 2 and 2 together and come up with 8 or something like that in order to put this story together, because the people that have put bits and pieces of the story together are generally not aware of each other, right? And it's like I said, we've got a little bit of sleuthing work to do. We've got the question of history of language. That tends towards a requirement for telepathic communications in recent prehistory. You've got remnant telepathy in our own age, right? The question of Rupert Sheldrake and Dean Radin, Gonsfeld experiments, okay? Aldegrassi and static electricity. What is that about? Okay. Bible stories prior to and after the fall of the tower, right? Plato and human-animal communications, antediluvian times. Julian Jaynes. It's the key to the whole thing, right? I mean, that's beyond interesting. Ghost stories in the Bible, and then the question of the Egyptian notion of Ka from the Old Kingdom in Egypt, right? So that's what we're going to look at. It might take a while. Okay, history of language, right? Indo-European similarities, which do not exist in Semitic languages. That's the biggest conflict that there is as far as like trying to study languages or trying to claim that there actually is such a thing as Nostratic or any kind of a superfamily of language which might ever have included both Indo-European and Semitic languages. I believe it's demonstrable that there never could have been, okay? Let's look at some of these items. And normally, like if all you speak is English and you go out to learn other languages, you're almost certainly, in most cases, you're going to be studying other Indo-European languages. You're either going to be studying French or Spanish, which would be Romance languages, German or Dutch or Swedish. These things are called Germanic languages. It's another family or another group of the Indo-European family. Slavic languages, Russian, okay? An English-speaking person will recognize half of all the German words he ever sees. I mean, the divide between English and German is no more than 1,000 or 12 or 1,400 years back in time, right? The divide between Germanic and Slavic languages is more like 2,500 or 3,000 years back in the past, right? So you expect to see more differences between English and Russian. Nonetheless, it's amazing what all you'll recognize. I mean, even going from English to Russian, right? It's like fire. Let's look at some common words, right? Fire. Russians say огонь, right? That's the same thing as ignite, ignition. Indians say Agni, the god of fire. Sanskrit, right? Kettle, katyol. Saddle, sidlo. The ordinary word for to walk or to go somewhere was the Russian word, which struck me as the weirdest thing in the Russian language, right? It's based on a very iti, ya idu, ti idiotion, idiot, right? Ani idu. It's based on a very simple and very old Indo-European root word, which eat, which means a single step, right? We say iterate, iteration, itinerary. If I think I iterate myself to the store, then hearing a Russian say "Ya idu v magazine" doesn't really sound that weird anymore. Too many ordinary things: earth, air, fire, wind, water, voda, right? Wind,
Right.
wind, right? Milk, moleko, ladle. Like I need a spoon for something. Um, Say Löffel, German, right? Loschka, same basic word, across all three languages. This is an interesting sort of an Indo-European root word kind of thing. LG, right? Like liege, lord, something that you owe allegiance to. We have all kinds of words which are based on that, right? Allegiance, relegate, delegate, obligate, right? I believe that the Russian word to have to do something, which is like a debt in the Russian language, dolg, right? And I have to do something, dolzhin. And I believe all that is the ordinary little preposition. I've got an L there, it should be a D, right? The ordinary little preposition da, up to, and then LG. I think that's where they comes from, dolzhin. At any rate, PF words, right? Indo-European people all used to pronounce P's and F's together. That was common. You still have large numbers of words like that in German. File, an arrow, right? Pferde, P-F-E-R-D-E, a horse, right? Pfennig, a penny. German dictionaries tell me that there are 269 words like that in the German language, right? This is just looking at online Wörterbücher, right? Von Fad bis Pfützenwasser, just a long list of them. Words which start with a P in one Indo-European language and an F in the next, right? Because they originally were pronounced, it was the same word with a P and a PF in front of it, right? So that, like, if it's split up one way, it would, like foot. You there?
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah, it was just my son came in the room for a second. Keep going.
Oh, okay. A foot, pied in French, right? Footle, pedal. Same thing, right? Five, fünf in German rather. Pump, like in Gaelic language, okay, a fish, pesha, pesha frita baklava, right? Everybody's heard that. Flame, in Russian, plamia, same thing. Flow, swim, right? Plavets, plavanya, okay, that means flowing, swimming, right? They've taken a concept. If you go back far enough, it's the same thing between Germanic and Slavic. There's a kind of a medicine they make, which is a heart medicine called Plavix, right? Which means it's exactly the same way that they have it in Russian. Fart, perdiets, right? On perdiel. Okay, fall, very common conception, right? Pada, on upal, yaupal, ana, upala, right? P versus F, P in Russian, F in English, right? Family members nearly the same across all Indo-European languages. Brother, bruder, German, right? Brat, brother, sister, Schwester, Sistra.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, these words stay the same. Mother, father, brother, sister, all these kinds of things pretty nearly stay the same going across like Indo-European languages. Paternoster, right? Jupiter, Dios Pitar, right? Sky Father. Okay, personal pronouns, numbers, all nearly the same across in the European languages. Okay, what am I trying to get to here? Languages and macroevolution. This creates a gigantic problem for anybody wanting to believe that, languages have evolved, or that like both Semitic and Indo-European languages have evolved from some super family of languages like Nostratic. Okay, I don't believe there ever was such a thing as Nostratic language. The biggest problem for anybody wishing to believe in any sort of macroevolution for languages is the Indo-European Semitic divide. There's no meaningful racial difference between the two groups, and there's no reason to believe that they might have split up more than a few thousand, I would say 3,000 or 4,000 years ago at the most. Okay, you would naturally expect the two groups of languages to be strongly related, and yet, other than for a few borrowed words, I mean a handful of borrowed words, they do not appear to be related at all. Even the PF nexus, crucial to anything being related to the Indo-European family, is not present. There's no trace of that in Semitic languages. Okay, that says that you've got a big problem sitting there. What the evidence actually suggests is something substantially more complicated and strange than any sort of evolution of languages. The evidence suggests that prior to some very recent point in time, human communication was of some totally different nature than our present spoken languages, and that thereafter some sort of a substantial change took place, and that older system of communication stopped working on a single day, has never worked again since that time. Given that hypothesis, all you need to explain the Indo-European Semitic divide is that the two groups were separated by the Caucasus Mountains for the critical period of 1 or 2 centuries during which spoken languages were being devised. In other words, they were having to invent spoken languages for themselves out of dire necessity after whatever that system they had been using for communications broke down. That's the evidence from the history of language, right? And that says you almost have to have something completely different, in order for, human society to work. That you just didn't even have spoken languages prior to some very recent event. Next item, remnant, that's almost a tongue twister, isn't it? Remnant telepathy in our own age. Rupert Sheldrake, public enemy #1 for CSICOP, CSICOP, Community for the Scientific Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal. Okay, these are what I call professional skeptics. People that believe that they have the base of knowledge to debunk every new idea or every out-of-the-box idea that ever comes down the road, right? Rupert Sheldrake is a former director of studies for cell biology at Cambridge University, who in later life has taken up the study of things which you would normally call paranormal, using good experimental design and statistical methodology. Thus, his use of statistical methods to investigate the phenomenon of people guessing correctly most of the time whether or not they are being stared at by others is entirely in keeping with the manner in which the science of statistics is meant to be used. It's not meant to be used to study things in which free will is involved, right? That is a misuse of statistical methods. Okay, what Sheldrake and Dean Radin are doing with statistics is completely legitimate. In the case of dogs who appear to know the first moment their owner heads for home, some dogs observed going to sit on the door when their owners begin their journeys home. Sheldrake has devised a simple and elegant test. He has had dog owners set out on window shopping tours along with one of his assistants, with only the assistant knowing the predetermined time to start home. Sure enough, in such cases, when the owner is told that the time to return home has arrived, the dog has dutifully gone to the door as noted by another assistant who would remain at the owner's home. Okay, to the second, right? In other words, the assistant with the owner would, would look at his watch, the sweep hand would hit the announced time. So, gee, it's time to go home, right? They both start back to their car where it's parked, and right there at that moment, the dog goes and sits at the door. Right? There's no normal way to explain something like that, and that just drives the psychop crowd crazy. So you can imagine, right? This is what I mean when I say that he's like public enemy #1 to those people. By these and other methods, Sheldrake has demonstrated to a statistical certainty that a number of things normally designated as paranormal are real. Naturally enough, this has earned him the animosity of the psychop crowd and of other professional skeptics. Sheldrake has also noted that major league computational power until recently was an exclusive prerogative of government agencies, large corporations, and large universities, but that the common man now has access to such compute power, and with it, a significant scientific investigation on the cheap, right? He has numerous books, and Rupert Sheldrake is an easy search on, he's got all kinds of YouTube videos and books available to the public, right? I mean, it's easy to find. He has a book called 7 Experiments Which Could Change the World, and everybody should have a copy of that, and particularly any high school kid, you know, that ever has any sort of a science project due should have a copy of that sitting around. Okay, I mean, that's mandatory. Sheldrake is the originator of the notion of morphogenic fields or morphic fields. There's no shortage of Sheldrake, okay. Have you ever
What is a morphogenic field?
I'm sorry?
What is a morphogenic field?
I was going to ask you that, you know, if you'd ever heard the term before.
Yes, I've heard of it, but I don't know what it is.
Field is some kind of a universal piece of information. Okay, it has to do with the transmission of information around the universe, not just around our solar system, not just around the Milky Way galaxy, but pretty much everywhere, right?
Right.
It seems to be the case that when somebody dreams up an idea, like at point A, then for somebody else to dream up that idea at point B just got a whole lot easier, right? In other words, they'll find, you know, English experimenters have determined that, you know, things which they've just figured out, like in England, get figured out in short order in places in the world where there's no possible way of the information having gotten from here to there.
Yeah, going by the name, it's something genetic that morphs, right?
No, morphology, you know, like shape or nature. Okay,
It morphs in some
something
kind of
that
way.
creates the nature of something, right? I guess is the best way to think of that word.
Yeah, I'll have to look it up.
Okay, Ganzfeld experiments, and I don't know whether I should be writing that with a hyphen or just the word Ganzfeld with, you know, just one word, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Conducted by Dean Radin and other experimenters also turn up a high degree of statistical significance in the extent to which human subjects in white noise environments are actually able to transmit information one to another.
Mm-hmm.
That's an interesting kettle of fish. Okay, thus based, we'll say a little bit more about Dean Radin here next item up, right? Thus based on a number of Sheldrake's results and related similar studies, there is substantial reason to believe that there is at least some kind of a minimal telepathic capability amongst humans and other higher animals even today. Okay, who is Dean Radin?
Yeah.
Dean Radin is a noted researcher who has been involved in Ganzfeld experiments, which many believe have demonstrated the reality of telepathy and related phenomena to a very high degree of statistical significance. Interestingly, most of those experiments involve white noise, and that's a good thing to keep in mind. Those experiments are controversial, but there is no question that white noise produces altered psychological states, and historically at least, white noise has also been associated with static electricity, and we'll shortly get to why that's important.
Right.
See a little bit of what a Wikipedia article has to say about Ganzfeld experiments. Okay. Ray Hyman, they had like a group of experiments which were done in '86, which were controversial, and efforts have been made to eliminate the causes of the controversy. That's a little bit of what's being said here. Okay, I hadn't really gone over this, right? I mean, as far as me trying to read this out loud or anything.
Yeah.
In '82, Honorton had started a series of Otto Ganzfeld experiments at his psychological research laboratories. These studies were specifically designed to avoid the same potential problems as those identified in the '86. You must mean '92, okay? Because I mean, he's talking about something that took place after, you know. I mean, I didn't doctor that or anything.
No.
You must be '92. Okay. To avoid, specifically designed to avoid the same potential problems as those identified in the '86 joint communique issued by Hyman and Honorton. The PRL trials continued until October of '89. In '90, Honorton et al. Published the results of 11 Otto Ganzfeld experiments they claimed met the standards specified by Hyman and Honorton. Okay, in these experiments, 240 participants contributed 329 sessions. Okay, so they've got enough of a statistical sample there. Hyman analyzed these experiments and wrote they met most, but not all, of the stringent standards of the Joint Communique. He expressed concerns with the randomization procedure, the reliability of which he was not able to confirm based on the data provided by them. Okay. The overall significance of the experiments was solely due to dynamic targets. And the hit, this is where it gets interesting right here.
Okay.
However, some interesting patterns were found that implied visual cues may have leaked. Like maybe somebody cheated or something.
Mm-hmm.
And what they're doing is they're putting somebody in a room in a white noise environment. Right? And people, a human being left in a white noise environment after more than 20 or 30 minutes, they usually start to hallucinate.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Yeah,
this
we've discussed that before.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The most suspicious pattern was the fact that the hit rate for a given target increased with the frequency of occurrence of that target in the experiment.
Mm-hmm.
The hit rate for the targets that occurred only once was right at the chance expectation of 25%, right? You're going to put somebody in a room in a white noise environment and have somebody outside the room try to think some kind of a thought into this person's head.
Okay.
Right? And then they're going, and he might have a picture of a truck in front of him. Then after the 30 minutes, then they're going to ask this guy, you've got four things. I've got four pictures here. It's like I've got a picture of a ship and a truck and an airplane and a bridge, right? Which one of these was John over there thinking about right now? I mean, by all rights, if you do enough of these, it should break out like 25, 25, 25, 25%, right? I mean, it should be completely random, but it's not, right? I mean, to a very high degree of statistical significance, this process, like I said, it's not perfect. It's like it doesn't work all the time, right? But it's like, to a very high degree of significance, this extraneous idea is somehow or other filtering into the test subject's head.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? Now,
yeah.
But what they're saying is that if you use if I do the same test and I have a truck in there, like say if I do like 3 or 4 more sessions, and then I have something else with the truck being the item, right? And then all of a sudden the hit rate goes way up.
Mm-hmm.
Right? For those that occurred 3 times, it was 38%. And for those targets that occurred 60 more times, hit rate was 52%. So it's almost becoming reliable. Okay, each time you get the idea. Hit.
Mm-hmm.
Hyman wrote these studies were an improvement over the older counterparts, but were not a successful replication of the Gunchfeld experiments, nor a confirmation of PSI. He concluded the experiments were flawed because they did not preclude the possibility of sensory leakage. He's saying somebody may have cheated or something may have failed in the test, right? But he's overlooking a completely different possibility, right? Of course, and this is my own wording here. Of course, the other thing which would account for the hit rate of a given target increasing with the frequency of occurrence of that target in the experiment would be Sheldrake's idea of a morphogenic field, which is the thing we just talked about.
Mm-hmm.
You with me?
Yes.
Okay, that says that once something has happened somewhere, it gets easier for it to happen again, right? That's the basic idea of Sheldrake's morphogenic field. The experimenters in this case were completely overlooking that possibility. Okay, and this is, Dean Radin you would think should be, it's not like asking Dean Radin to be up on, on fusion energy or like, or like civil engineering or anything like that. I mean, these are related fields. And it seems obvious enough to me that like Radin was, the people, the research that's been described here, were not aware of this possibility. That strikes me as interesting. Next item on the agenda, Aldegrassi and static electricity.
Mm-hmm.
One of the most notable of Immanuel Velikovsky's understudies or acolytes, Aldegrassi is noted for an early version of a Saturn theory, which is a book called Solaria Binaria, and with an associate, Hugh Crosthwaite, for a large study of the role played by static electricity in ancient religious practices. Now, with Aldegrassi's permission,
Mm-hmm.
I have a complete collection of those little books and booklets on bear fabrique, right? And you could just go to this link. You've got 3 books there. One is called God's Fire, another one's called The Fire Not Burned, and the other is called Ka.
I'll definitely check that out.
Okay, bearfabrique.org
Yeah.
/history/degrazia.html, right? History with a capital H.
Yeah, I'll take a look at that.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Like I say, I've pointed out that I've got this file sitting here linked from Bear Fabrique now, so that anybody can go to this particular file and can find this link, right? And get a link to it.
Okay.
Grazia and Crosswaite note that the Greek oracles were typically located in remaining areas of concentration for static electricity. I mean, that's interesting. In earlier times, nobody had to go looking for static electricity. It was all around, right?
Right.
This is the Saturn, Venus, Mars.
Oh, yeah, we're well aware of that picture.
The Berkman current, right? And that produced a colossal static electrical environment on the Earth, and that would have made the whole Earth into a, if it wasn't what you would call a white noise environment, it would have been close to that, right?
Yeah, that's good.
Right. Here you've got this Peratt instability named after Anthony Peratt.
Yeah.
This is this funny case where, where you find, the thing that you see here is basically something you find in plasma physics experiments, like in contained bottles. And you find this picture on canyon walls in the form of petroglyphs, right? This is this fabulous T-shirt of the Thunderbolts groups, right?
Right, yeah.
Okay. These little books and booklets of Al DeGrazia's and Hugh Crosswaite's talk about static electricity in Bible times, right? You've got instructions for making a crude capacitor for yourself, exactly the same thing that Ben Franklin and people of his day would have called a Leyden bottle. Okay.
Ah, okay. There's something new.
Yeah, you've got like a layer of wood and, surrounded by, which is like an insulator, surrounded by a layer of conductive material, gold, right? And then what they call cherubim, are contact points, right? The contact points of the capacitor. This is from Exodus, right? Exodus 25:10. They shall make an ark of shittim wood, the 2 cubits and a half shall be the length thereof, cubit and a half the breadth, and a cubit and a half the height thereof. Overlay it with pure gold, within and without shalt thou overlay it. Make upon it a crown of gold round about, right? And thou shalt cast 4 rings of gold for it and put them in. Has to be like alloyed gold, something to make it strong enough to bear weight, right? And the 4 corners thereof, the 2 rings will be on one side of it, the 2 rings on the other side. So you're going to put stabs through these rings, right? And then you're going to get 2 guys on either side to carry this thing around. Thou shalt make the staves of shittim wood and overlay them with gold, right? And put the staves into the rings, okay? And then we scroll down a bit, Exodus 25:22. And there I will, so thou shalt put the mercy seat upon the ark. In the ark thou shalt put the testimony I shall give thee, and there I will meet with thee and commune with thee from above the mercy seat, from between the two contacts of the capacitor, right? Between the 2 cherubims, which are upon the ark of the testimony of all things, And of course, what do you see between the contact points of capacitor? If you see anything, it's going to be an electrical arc, spark, right? At any rate, he goes on, says, when Moses was gone into the tabernacle of the congregation to speak with him, he heard the voice of one speaking unto him from off the mercy seat that was upon the ark of the testimony, from between the 2 contact points, 2 cherubim. And he spoke unto him, right? Cherub is a funny word. It's one of these words that got borrowed back and forth between Latin and Hebrew, right? They didn't write vowel sounds in those days, right? They would just right consonants, and it was probably the case that the scribe class in the Indo-European world was predominantly right-handed, and in the Semitic world predominantly left-handed. So the European languages are typically written from left to right, whereas Hebrew and Arabic written from right to left. Okay, so that when they borrowed a word, it was frequently the case the word got turned around, like cherub, che, er, be, 3 letters, right? Arm is really what it means, right? Now the word for arm in Latin, brachia, be, er, che,
Yeah.
berch. You see what I'm saying?
Oh,
Those,
yeah.
those are
Yeah.
called reversals, right? And there's, I think Hugh Crosthwaite has some sort of a list of, about 100 of those.
I heard in the ancient world, if you were left-handed, they thought you were of the devil and they forced you to be right-handed.
Oh, it still goes on in the U.S. Army. Nobody, the U.S. Army doesn't have left-handed rifles.
Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy.
I've heard all about that at any rate. The
Yeah.
2 sons of
My
Eli.
dad was left-handed when he was a kid, and they forced
Yeah,
him to be a righty.
right, yeah. Right. Well, you heard what Joe Frazier said. Joe Frazier said the left-handed people should be drowned at birth, right? You can never get fights as a lefty. You have to learn how to box right-handed just in order to make a business out of it, right?
We're the only ones in our right mind, Ted.
Yeah, I know. At any
I'm a
rate, you
lefty.
have the one guy. What was the guy's name? At any rate, there was one point in Uzzah, like in the Old Testament, where they were trying to take this Ark of the Covenant somewhere on a wagon that was about to fall off the wagon. The one guy put his hand on the thing to steady it, so it didn't fall off the wagon. It was electrocuted, right? Killed him, right?
Yeah.
The authors of the Old Testament wrote the story down in their language, not ours, right? They didn't, they didn't have any kind of conception of somebody electrocuting himself. They just said the Lord killed him in
Yeah.
transgression,
Yeah.
right? In other words, it's one of the few cases where the Lord killed somebody outright.
Yeah.
Bible.
Sheesh.
Okay.
Crazy.
Next item up, Bible stories prior to and after the fall of the tower. Things to notice about Bible stories in Genesis. Prior to the flood and prior to the fall of the Tower of Babel, God speaks to men directly. The word prophet does not occur. The word prophet permeates the other books of the Old Testament, like after Genesis and after even after the flood and after the fall of the tower, right? But the word prophet does not appear in Genesis prior to the fall of the tower. Okay, likewise in Genesis prior to the flood, humans speak with animals as if that was normal. As in everybody knows women can talk to snakes, right?
Mm.
No magic or any such was required. After the fall of the tower, something exotic has to happen for Balaam to hold any sort of conversation with his donkey. You've read that story, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
At any rate, they say the Lord opened the mouth of the ass, right?
Yeah.
The same phraseology that you find for this ritual of the opening of the mouths of idols, to allow the village or the town to hear the voice of the idol. Okay. So in Genesis, now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made, and said unto the woman, yea, if God said, you shall not eat of every tree of the, you've read the conversation right then, the story of Balaam here. The Old Testament is laconic. Okay, it tells large stories in few words. Plato's version of a story like that is much more detailed, right? I mean, there's more to it. Let's take a look at this. This comes from Plato's dialogue, which is called Statesman. You've got a conversation between a young Socrates and a scholar or a priest of some sort. It's referred to as the stranger, right? It's probably some Egyptian priest, regarding antediluvian times, which Greeks and Romans referred to as the age of Kronos, which is Saturn, okay, and the former ability of humans to converse with other animals. Let's take a look at this. It says young Socrates here. You see what I'm saying?
Okay. Yeah.
Certainly that is quite consistent with what has preceded But tell me, what was the life which you said existed in the reign of Kronos, during antediluvian times,
Mhm.
in that cycle of the world or in this, for the change in the course of the stars and the sun must have occurred in both. And what the guy's really saying is, just what you've heard David Talbot and everybody say, that the flood was part of like a series of events which changed the whole nature of the solar system, right? It involved the capture of that the final capture of that southern part of the solar system, the bodies with the roughly 26-degree axis tilt, at least, Saturn, Neptune, Mars, and Earth, right?
Yeah.
May also have been like Uranus involved in that same thing. I mean, Uranus is laid over at a 90-degree angle, sort of. The strange Egyptian priest, or whatever he was, right? So I see that you enter into my meaning. Know that blessed and spontaneous life does not belong to the present cycle of the world, but to the previous one, in which God superintended the whole revolution of the universe, and the several parts of the universe were distributed under the rule of certain inferior deities, as is the way in some places still. There were demigods who were the shepherds of the various species and herds of animals. And each one was in all respects sufficient for those of whom he was the shepherd. Neither was there any violence or devouring of one another, or war or quarrel amongst them, the antediluvian peace, right, which is a big question mark. And that's one of these things that Troy and I have not figured out, okay? Somebody younger than either myself or Troy is going to have to figure that one out, right? I might tell of 10,000 other blessings which belong to that dispensation. The reason why the life of man was, as tradition says, spontaneous is as follows. In those days, God himself was their shepherd and ruled over them, just as man over them, who was by comparison a divine being, still rules over the lower animals. Under him there were no forms of government or separate possession of women and children, for all men rose again from the earth, having no memory of the past, and although they had nothing of this sort, the earth gave them fruits in abundance, which grew on trees and shrubs unbidden, and planted by the hand of man, and were not planted by the hand of man. And they dwelt naked and mostly in the open air, for the temperature of the seasons was mild. They had no beds, but lay on soft couches of grass, which grew plentifully out of the earth. Such was the life of man in the days of Kronos, when the earth was a satellite of the former dwarf star Saturn. That's really saying, Socrates, the character of our present life, which is said to be under Zeus, you know from your own experience, which was the happier, right? And Socrates, I don't know. Stranger says, then shall I determine for you as well as I can? And Socrates, by all means, right? The stranger, suppose that the nurslings of Kronos, the antediluvians, children of Saturn, right, having this boundless leisure and the power of holding intercourse, conversation, not only with men, but with the brute creation, with the animal world, had used all these advantages with a view to philosophy, conversing with the brutes as well as with the animals, as well as with one another, and learning of every nature which was gifted with any special power, and was able to contribute some special experience to the store of wisdom, there would be no difficulty in deciding that they would be 1,000 times happier than the men of our own day. Or again, if they had merely eaten and drunk until they were full and told stories to one another and to the animals, such stories as are now attributed to them. In this case also, I should think, the answer would be easy, but until some satisfactory witness can be found of the love of that age for knowledge and discussion, we had better let the matter drop and give the reason why we have unearthed this tale, and then we should be able to get on. Right? What he's saying here is that, like, that the humans were getting information from the other kinds of animals, right? If I wanted to know something about what might be happening 200 miles off to the east, right, I could send an eagle or something out there, maybe a peregrine, they move pretty quickly, taking about an hour, take a look, see what's going on, come back and tell me what's going on 200 miles off to the east. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Again, of course, nobody will ever teach snakes or donkeys to speak English or Italian. They don't have the physical necessities for it. But in an age in which communication was telepathic, I mean, why not, right?
Interesting.
Yeah, that strikes me as interesting.
Yeah.
Julian
Yeah.
James, okay?
Yeah.
Julian James, like Velikovsky's Worlds in Collision, Julian James's Origin of Consciousness is foundational to comprehending ancient history. And I regard these two scholars, Velikovsky and Julian James, as the two supreme scholars of the 20th century. These are the two
Oh.
supreme scholastic works of the 20th century.
Hmm.
Okay, so we're going to talk about Julian James a little bit here. And
Okay.
this involves a little bit the theory of evolution, right? James was a committed evolutionist, but that doesn't, that doesn't really impact his findings, right? In other words, findings are valid enough. The way
Right.
he might have interpreted these findings might be suspect, right? But, just the findings themselves are overwhelming. Julian
Right.
James was a psychology professor and amateur philologist. Have you ever heard that word?
I have, yes, I've heard it before. It's a
Somebody who,
language.
somebody who studies ancient languages
Yeah.
and culture, right? And it has to be an avocation. I mean, there aren't any jobs like that. That's what Nietzsche used to do for a living.
Mm-hmm.
An amateur philologist at Princeton University, whose main interest in historical questions involved Homer's Iliad and other literature from the same time period. Reading through such materials, James began to notice the curious absence of decision-making in the Iliad. That is, in the old part of the Iliad. There are two parts to the Iliad, right?
Mm-hmm.
Got an older and a newer part. In the newer part of the Iliad,
Yeah.
people behave much the way we behave, right? They don't have cars and motorcycles, right? But it's like the way they make decisions is similar to the way, the way they think is similar to the way we do.
Right.
In other works from the same age, at every point at which you or I would have to stop to consider how to proceed, the people in these ancient narratives are being told what to do by inner voices, which they describe as gods and goddesses. It began to dawn on James that what we call schizophrenia today, hearing voices that aren't there, was likely the normal state of affairs in ancient times. In other words, what we call schizophrenia, they would have called normal, and what we call normal, they probably would have called retarded. Okay?
Yeah.
James appears to have gone to the experts in neurophysiology at his school with the obvious question: what, if anything, could there possibly be in the human brain that would cause somebody to hear voices for no apparent reason? He didn't think there was much chance they would have any sort of an answer to that. But he figured, what the hell, it couldn't hurt to try, right?
Uh-huh.
And I said, oh, that, yeah, come on over here, we'll show you what that is. And, like that was a simple answer to that. You can
Right.
imagine the guy's hair stood up and fell over in his face, right?
Mm-hmm.
The basic answer was that there actually is a right brain analog to the speech center, or the Wernicke area on the left side of the human brain. For all intents and purposes, this right brain analog of the speech center appears to be a neurophysiological equivalent of the human appendix. It serves no apparent purpose.
Mm.
However, when this right side analog area is stimulated with electrical probes, as is sometimes done in experiments with epileptics,
Mm.
or often than not, patients claim to be hearing voices as real as if somebody was speaking to them.
Yeah.
All of this motivated James to write a book with the impossible title, The Origin of Consciousness and the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind, okay, which became an academic sensation in the mid to late 1970s. It still remains that way. There still is a Julian James Society, right? And I don't know if they still hold meetings in West Virginia, at Charleston, right? But, I've attended at least one of those.
Yeah.
James is an evolutionist. He claimed he had discovered that, at least during the time between Exodus and Alexander, which is the time frame he was looking at pretty much, human societies had simply evolved into a state in which they were being controlled by what he termed auditory hallucinations. Thus, his diagram, reproduced below, which shows the speech center, the right side analog to the speech center, and the bridge crossover between the two, and denoting the right side analog to the speech center as a hallucinatory area. You can see the picture here,
Yeah.
right? You've got the Wernicke area, the speech center, which most people have at least heard of somewhat, right?
Yeah.
You've got this right side analog to the speech center. This is where the term bicameral mind comes up, right? Two-chambered, okay?
Yeah.
The breakdown of the origin of consciousness and the breakdown of the two-chambered mind, the bicameral mind.
Yeah.
Nobody can remember that. Just go to, get on Amazon and type in Julian Jaynes
Yeah.
or consciousness, right? I mean, that'll turn something up, right? Ancient literature includes descriptions of things outside of our experience, including descriptions of religious practices intended to communicate directly with the spirit realm. Such practices included prophecy, oracles, familiar spirits, such as the tale of Saul, Samuel, and the witch of Endor. Idolatry, the practices involved in allowing, entire villages and towns and cities to hear a voice emanating from one of these idols. Okay?
Hmm.
The rituals associated with the worship of idols, electrostatic devices such as the Ark of the Covenant, which you've just gone over, right? All such
Yeah.
practices involve trance states similar to hypnosis. All involve static electricity, and all involved a part of the human brain which we no longer use. And they all stopped working prior to the time of Alexander, right? There's the four things in common with all those phenomena, all
Hmm.
practices, right?
I see. Yeah. Yeah, so they
James,
were using that side of the brain to do
yeah,
what they no longer can do.
James' book is largely an attempt to explain those kinds of phenomena. But he neglects the history of the world prior to the books of Moses, that is, the question of Genesis and the question of the origin of language.
Mhm.
Again, the words prophet and prophecy, which permeate the books of the Old Testament after Genesis, do not occur in Genesis other than in the one vague reference to Abraham as God's prophet, which occurs after the flood and after the incident involving the Tower of Babel. What does the story of the Tower of Babel mean? Okay, and the answer to this is that most people have this one wrong, and that the translations that you see and as far as I know, in all English Bibles and German and Russian Bibles aren't any better, right? It's like they reads the same way. Most assume that the tale of the Tower of Babel amounts to a claim that men originally spoke one language such as we speak now, and that God then caused them to speak multitudinous languages such as we speak now. Is that the case, or could it be that some larger change is indicated? Could it be that the phenomena that James described formed the basis of the original human communication capacity? Could it be that for some reason that stopped working and that languages such as we now speak were devised thereafter? Okay? In other words, could it be that the people who have translated the Bible into Western languages pretty much forever have all, not knowing what the story actually meant, have translated it into the closest thing that they could come up with, which seemed to make any sense to them, right? And that's really what you have, okay? The King James Bible notes that the whole earth was of one language and of one speech, right?
Right.
I've spoken with a number of people, including two very, very good experts on a Hebrew language, right? This is going to be Lisa Bethliel in Jerusalem, and while James Cone was alive, right, with him, right? And they both say the same thing. Okay? Here's what that means. One language, few words. In other words, the phrase should read, the whole earth was of one language, few words, or possibly one language, few spoken words. That
Right.
appears to be what the story means. This appears to mean that before the incident associated with the Tower of Babel, there was a minimalistic set of spoken words used for ritualistic purposes, but not as a general system of communications. Egyptians referred to these words as words of power. We'll get to Dr. Budge in a while here. Dr. E.A. Wallace Budge, describing the Egyptian god Thoth, who was called the Lord of divine words and mighty in speech, right, who was associated with language. From one aspect, he is speech itself. Thoth could teach a man not only words of power, but also the manner in which to utter them. The words, however, must be learned from Thoth. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that tot,
I like Thoth. Yeah, it's like thought.
like frothing saucer,
Yeah. I can't get rid of this no camera icon. I hope it's not going to come through on the screen. I've been messing around with it forever, and it just isn't going away. There, it went away. Well, when I move the mouse to your name, it goes away. Okay, go back. Go. We're good.
Okay, Julian Jaynes assumed that human societies had simply evolved into a state in which they were being controlled or governed by systems of auditory hallucinations that were experienced by groups as well as individuals. He assumed that this sort of bicameral mind passed away and that what we call consciousness develops due to societal changes in a manner consistent with ideas about evolution. Nonetheless, there appear to be overwhelming problems with the idea of man evolving into what amounts to a dysfunctional state, and the world of the Old Testament was intensely dysfunctional. Fighting wars and sacrificing children at the behest of stone or wooden idols is not a formula for success in life, and if any one group of people were to start living that way, they would be at a gigantic evolutionary disadvantage versus every other group of people who did not, just kept on living in a sane manner, right?
Yeah.
We see no way to believe that such a way of living could become dominant had it not been a primordial condition. Likewise, assuming that such a state had somehow become the common condition of mankind, we don't see a way to believe that anybody would ever find a gradualistic way out of such a state of affairs. Here's what appears to be the case. Okay, what appears to be the case is that communications amongst humans, and most likely amongst higher animals as well, was originally telepathic, and that this capability depended in some manner upon the electrostatic environment of the ancient solar system. At the time of the incident associated with the Tower of Babel, whatever that previous telepathic communication system depended upon broke down and has never been restored since. Humans, with their voluntary control of breathing, were able to devise spoken languages at that time, but other creatures which previously had access to complex communication capabilities have lacked them since that time. Okay, the human brain was somehow rewired in that process. Because the ancient telepathic communication system involved a part of the human brain that still exists, the capability would have to have been primordial to the human race, that is, Cro-Magnon people would have possessed it.
You know, it reminds me of the figures that were found on Göbekli Tepe with no mouth.
Yeah, it could easily be part of that. It's like scholars have sort of wondered at the way at which new ideas found their way throughout the Cro-Magnon world in a very short space of time, right? And this is the same thing of not only Julian Jaynes, but of Rupert Sheldrake's,
Yeah.
Once somebody, I don't think they had to invent the atlatl, when they came here to Earth, right? I think they were using atlatls as, fishing weapons where they came from, right? And, other kinds of things which were invented or discovered, seem to pop up in one place and then, like 10 or 20 years later, they're sort of everywhere. Okay, yeah. I think that's part of what you're seeing here. We believe that Julian Jaynes was correct in describing the voices that people heard coming from idols as hallucinations. There's no way to believe that anything good ever could have come of hearkening to the voices of stone or wooden idols. The cases of oracles, prophets, and witches, those with familiar spirits, more complicated. Entire nations appear to have run for centuries on information coming back from the trance states of oracles and prophets. Okay, you're aware of the way that the Greek oracles worked, right? You had teenage girls who were going into a trance state, and people were asking them complicated questions. How to resolve questions involving, politics or business or whatever, right? And these teenage girls would have absolutely no way of knowing an answer to any of these questions. Nonetheless, the answer always came back immediately. They didn't have to think about it, and the answer was always right. This went on for centuries. Amazing.
Yeah.
That went on for centuries, right? And then when all of that stuff finally collapsed, as you read in Zechariah, right, the information turned into mush, and it became dangerous to listen to them. It became dangerous to listen to prophets, to oracles, to anything like that. It became dangerous to try to make any kind of a decision based on anything which you might have thought had come back from this Ark of the Covenant as well.
Yeah.
You read in Zechariah, Okay. It shall come to pass that when any shall yet prophesy, then his father and his mother that begat him shall say to him, Thou shalt not live, for thou speakest lies in the name of the Lord. And they're just going to thrust him through with a spear or a sword or something, right? So you're going to kill the kid.
Yeah.
In other
Yeah.
words, thou shalt not suffer a prophet to live either, right?
Hmm.
Presumably, somewhere around the time of the Trojan War, man's ancient communications capability came to a final end and the last vestiges of it died out. In historical times, you get something very rare where there's some vestige of this, right? But it's not reliable and doesn't go on working for very long. That's the story of Joan of Arc. Okay, the Roman Church, whatever they lack in celibacy, they make up for in thoroughness, right? They investigated Joan of Arc for 400 or 500 years. I think so. I could be wrong. I think it's somewhere back around 1950 or thereabouts that they, granted sainthood to Joan of Arc.
Mm-hmm.
That's sort of an interesting story.
Yeah. To this day, we still have mediums and psychics and fortune tellers
Yeah,
and.
okay, but I'm saying that it's not to the extent that anything like that exists at all, it's nowhere close to being reliable.
Oh yeah.
You
No.
can't base decisions on anything like that, where
No.
these people have gone for centuries and they were basing decisions on
Right.
kind of information.
Yeah.
Julian James was a committed evolutionist. He wanted to believe that the phenomena he was investigating all involved what he called auditory hallucinations. Nonetheless, at least at one point, he stopped just short of being forced to believe the real information was involved in these practices. Here's Julian James' word. This is interesting, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
The obdurate rationalist simply scoffs plena Dio. Indeed, just as the mediums of our own time have always been exposed as frauds, so these so-called oracles were really performances manipulated by others in front of an illiterate peasantry for political or monetary ends, but such a realpolitik attitude is doctrinaire at best. Possibly there was some chicanery in the oracle's last days, perhaps some bribery of the prophets, those subsidiary priests or priestesses who interpreted what the oracle meant, but earlier, to sustain so massive a fraud for an entire millennium through the most brilliant intellectual society and civilization the world has yet known is impossible. It's just impossible. Nor can it jive with the complete absence of criticism of the oracle until the Roman period, nor with the political wise and often cynical Plato reverently calling Delphi the interpreter of religion for all the world. Okay, so here you've got a committed evolutionist saying that if you really look at it hard enough, it appears as if these prophets must have at one point have been dealing with real information. They're getting real information between our world and the spirit world, is what the guy just said. You understand what I'm saying? That's a big deal. Okay.
Yeah.
Ghost stories in the Bible. Okay. That's the next little
Segment.
segment. Yeah, there's a half dozen or so stories in the Bible about people being heard from after they died. 3 of these stories are common: the stories of Jesus himself, Lazarus, the tale of Samuel, Saul, and the witch of Endor. Several elements of those stories match up so closely that they make a powerful argument for the reality of the stories.
Yeah.
Since the authors were widely separated in space and time, had no opportunity to get together in a room, try to match those stories up artificially. Gee, we need to get our story straight, like, the deep staters, right? I mean, we'll be hearing that in the near future. Each of the instances was seen by enough witnesses that the story cannot simply be written off, okay?
Yeah.
In no case was it possible, these are things that these stories have in common, in no case was it possible to believe that anybody ever came back from the dead in a real dead body. If you want dead bodies walking around, the religion you want is voodoo.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? I
Yeah.
mean, nonetheless, the experiences of witnesses was indistinguishable from what you might expect if the person had in fact come back in a human body, in a dead human body, down to the detail of nail holes in the case of Christ himself, as for the witness of Thomas. Okay? So these people have basically just walked through a portal of some sort into a larger dimension of reality. That's really what you're reading in these stories. All of these events were temporary. This is the final thing that they all have in common, lasting a few days or a couple of weeks. Nobody ever stuck around for another 10 or 20 years after coming back from the dead, right?
Right.
In the case of Lazarus, there isn't any second part of the story which says, like, and Lazarus, lived for, for 33 years after
Yeah.
restored from the dead by Jesus.
Right.
Jesus married Sheila Goldfarb, and they opened up a delicatessen in Jerusalem, which is here to this day, right? You don't read that part of the story, right?
Yeah.
Again, the interesting thing is these stories are widely separated in time and place. There's no way to believe the authors ever got together in a room to try to get the details to match up. That argues against thinking the stories to be fanciful. In the case of Christ, you have the apostles to the man going to the deaths rather than deny having witnessed the resurrection. One person going to his death for a cause which he knew to be false might or might not be believable, but 11 out of 11, excluding Judas, okay, there's no way, that's impossible. Final piece of this whole thing is the question of the old kingdom of Egypt and the notion of Ka. The way that ordinary people experienced this telepathic age, right? Now,
Yeah.
here it appears to be the case that hearing from somebody who had died was not completely uncommon in ancient Egypt. By the day that Jesus was born, it had been centuries, and nobody had seen or heard anything like that, right? People were becoming evolutionists and atheists, and basically Jesus said, like, hey, I'm going to show you, you guys think that, death is the end of everything, right? I'm going to prove to you that that's not the case, right? I'm going to simply allow these Romans to kill me in their, in the normal gruesome manner. And then 3 days later, I'm going to come back, right? And if you didn't know about it, you might think that, like, well, maybe a handful of people knew about that. No, this is a major sort of religious movement, right? And in those days, they didn't have the WWF or the NFL or, Hollywood or movies or anything like that at all. It's like Lon Solomon, who, the head pastor at the largest evangelical church in the Washington, D.C. area, the McLean Bible Church, has said that, like, the bookies were taking bets down on this, right? Everybody knew about this. Any rate.
Strange picture.
Yeah, I know, but like back in these days, back in the time of the old kingdom of Egypt, it wasn't uncommon, right? Here you've got a picture of Khnum creating a person, and when Khnum goes to create a person, he creates that person's Ka at the same time, and the Ka, you can see, is pointing towards his mouth, which is basically an indication that Ka, as Julian Jaynes claimed, is a voice, it's a bicameral voice phenomenon, right?
Right.
Egyptians of the Old Kingdom believed that when the god Khnum created a person on his potter's wheel, he created the person and that person's Ka at the same time. That's what the picture shows.
Ah, okay.
Ka was the most major idea in Egyptian religion. Okay? Adolf Hitler, made a number of interesting statements about lies and big lies, infamously noted that normal people are apt to lie in small things but do not tell gross or infamous lies. And the principle seems to apply here. That is, the idea of Khnum making people on a potter's wheel is obviously fanciful, but could the most major idea in Egyptian religion and practices be total fiction? That's pretty far-fetched, right? We're going to examine that question in order to get a realistic picture of what the term Ka meant. We're going to look back at the item from three separate, we're going to look back at the notion of Ka from three separate angles. Okay, we noted above that ancient literature included descriptions of things outside of our experience, including descriptions of religious practices intended to communicate directly with spirits, right? Such practices, okay, they included prophecy, oracles, and all these kinds of things, right? In particular, a person reading through more than a little bit of such materials will notice Julian Jaynes describing certain phenomena as bicameral paranormal phenomena, while L. deGrazia and Hugh Crosthwaite describe the same phenomena as electrostatic phenomena. It doesn't take the world's greatest scholar to deduce that the ancient electrostatic field of the Earth may have been enabling the bicameral phenomena. But again, in the case of the notion of Ka, we have three views on the subject. There is the view of Julian Jaynes, which describes Ka as a bicameral phenomenon. Okay, Jaynes, okay, origin of consciousness. You can find this in the book of Julian Jaynes on a Kindle format as well, right? Ebooks.
Okay.
The view of Aldegrassi and Hugh Crosswaite described unrelated phenomena as electrical phenomena. Okay, I've mentioned this. There's the view of the Old Kingdom Egyptians themselves in terms of religious beliefs and everyday experience, right? The way that ordinary people experience this telepathic age. These are found on interior walls of the pyramids and other buildings and on papyri. And we have reasonable translations beginning in the late 19th century. Particularly the writings of Dr. E.A. Wallace Budge are available at little or no cost in Kindle ebook format. And I've had some people tell me that these are not the best translations of Egyptian writings that there are. But, as far as I'm concerned, for government work, it's perfectly good enough, right? In other words, these are the most approachable, excuse me, the most approachable and the easiest to get your hands on.
Yeah, don't worry, I'll edit them out.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
very interesting. Keep going. It's very interesting. Keep going. You want to take a break?
No, I think I'm okay.
Okay.
Recall that in the case of Jesus' own resurrection, as well as the case of Lazarus and Saul, Samuel and the woman from Endor, there was a funny question as to whether or not the person actually had come back in a physical human body, dead physical human body. Everybody, including the authors, knew perfectly well what happened to bodies after death. There was no possibility of a dead body being reanimated. And again, if you want dead bodies walking around, the religion you need is voodoo. Nonetheless, the witnesses, the experience was utterly indistinguishable from what they might have anticipated if the person actually had returned in a real physical human body, down to the detail of the Apostle Thomas being able to satisfy himself at the nail holes in the case of Jesus, right?
Mm-hmm.
Consider then what Dr. Budge has to say about the concept of Ka as a double, right? This is Dr. Budge. In the interval which elapsed between the period of prehistoric burials and the fourth dynasty, the Egyptian formulated certain theories about the component parts of his own body. We must consider these briefly before we can describe the form in which the dead was believed to rise. Right? The physical body of the man was called khat, word which indicates something which may decay, in which decay is inherent, and it was this which was buried in the tomb. Right, under mummification and its preservation from destruction of every kind was the object of all amulets, ceremonies, prayers, formulae. From the earliest to the latest times, the god Osiris even possessed such a body, and its various members were preserved as relics in several shrines in Egypt. This is where it gets interesting. Attached to the body in some remarkable way was Ka, the Ka, or double of a man. May be defined as an abstract individuality or personality which was endowed with all his characteristic attributes, and it possessed an absolutely independent existence. It was free to move from place to place upon the earth at will, and it could enter heaven and hold converse with the gods. Okay, that's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, and also presumably with people living on other worlds, right?
Right.
The offerings made in the tombs of all periods were intended for the nourishment of the Ka, and it was supposed to be able to eat and drink and to enjoy the odor of incense. In the earliest times, a certain portion of the tomb was set apart for the use of the Ka, and the religious organization of the period ordered that a class of priests should perform ceremonies and recite prayers at stated seasons for the benefit of the Ka and the Ka chapel. So they have a Ka chapel, at least for the case of rich people. Right now, whether you or I would ever have a Ka chapel for ourselves is sort of questionable. Okay, these were known as Ka priests. In the period when the pyramids were built, it was firmly believed that the deceased in some form was able to be purified and to sit down and to eat bread with it unceasingly and forever, and the Ka who was not satisfied with a sufficiency of food in the shape of offerings of bread, cakes, flour, fruit, wine, ale, was in serious danger of starvation. Similarly, John chapter 12 notes, then Jesus 6 days before the Passover came to Bethany where Lazarus was, which had been dead, whom he raised from the dead. And they made him a supper, and Martha served, and Lazarus was one of them that sat at the table with him. Now, if this story was being written in 2019, a modern person would expect Lazarus to have said something like, hey, I'm really just a ghost, right? And ghosts don't eat food, and people go ahead and eat. And then you would say that, right?
Yeah.
Well, the story, strangely enough, doesn't read that way. You assume that Lazarus ate dinner with the others, or at least, for all intents and purposes, appeared to do so.
That's
Okay.
it's a little hard to, it's a stretch.
Well, this is the same kind of thing as like feeding a multitude with, 4 or 5 fish, or, walking on water. A number of these things that Jesus did basically involve people like taking 1 or 2 steps into a larger dimension of reality. Yeah, that's the best way I could describe it. I mean, I don't know exactly, how Jesus came and did all these things, but I assume that you're talking about something very closely related to the kinds of things that Julian James was talking about, that you had to be using this right side portion of your mind
Right, yeah.
In order, and it could be that you would take 1 or 2 steps on, start off working pretty well, and you'd take 1 or 2 steps onto the top of the water, right? And then like, oh, gee, it was like, all of a sudden it would flip back off again, and geez, man, I'm gonna have to swim.
Right.
You understand what I'm saying, right?
Well, yes. There's a growing number of people who claim that the historical Jesus is a composite of more than one person, and what they're talking mostly about is the sun and the 12 signs of the zodiac.
Yeah, okay, I don't believe that at all. There's too many things about Jesus which are completely different from other religious leaders.
Yeah,
right?
I didn't say I agreed with it. I just said that there's a lot of people that, and they do have a strong argument.
Right. All of the scholars from the late 1800s who were looking at these questions noted that Ka was a very strange concept for moderns to come to grips with, and was difficult to translate exactly, but the most common translation was and remains double. Double incorporated something like the normal modern notion of a spirit which survives after a person's death, but it was more than that. As Dr. Budge notes, this double served as an alter ego of some sort, which was both attached to and separate from the person prior to death, and could seemingly neatly resolve the problem which people occasionally face of needing to be in 2 places at the same time. The double seemingly was also unfettered by normal human physical limitations involving time and space. Images show Khnum creating a man and his double at the same time as noted above. You also see things like this. Okay, you've got another picture here where you've got like, in this case, both the person and the double are pointing towards the mouths, right? So that, so there's no question that voice phenomena are involved in whatever's going on here in this picture, right?
Yeah.
Notice both images, you see one or both of the person and the double pointing towards his mouth. Julian James claims because Ka double is basically a bicameral voice phenomena. This is Julian James again, right?
Yeah.
The Ka of the God King is of particular interest. It was heard, I suggest, by the king in the accents of his own father. It's heard in the hallucinations of, you assume he's always dealing with auditory hallucinations, of his courtiers as the king's own voice, which is the really important thing. Texts state that when a king sat at a meal and ate, his Ka sat and ate with him. The pyramids are full of false doors, sometimes simply painted on the limestone walls, though, through which the deceased god King's Ka could pass out into the world and be heard, right? It was only the King's Ka, which is pictured on monuments, sometimes as a standard bearer holding his staff, the staff of the king's head, and the feather, or as a bird perched behind the king's head. The most significant are the representations of the king's cause, his twin and birth scenes. In one such scene, the god Khnum is shown forming the king and his ka on his potter's wheel. They're identical small figures, except that the ka has his left hand pointed towards his mouth, suggests that he might that he is what we might describe as a persona of speech. It means bicameral speech here.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. We
So-
get the words hour and horizon from the name Horus.
Okay, no, that's interesting to say the least.
Yeah.
I'm trying to decide whether or not we've come to a stopping point here. It's like, whether I could just leave this for somebody to read through at his own discretion, or...
Yeah. Well, that's up to you. And also, what I'm sure that after people see this, they're probably going to have a lot of questions. And instead of doing a lot of typing, maybe we can do a little bit of a half-hour kind of show where you can just answer questions. I'm just thinking.
Let me just read this one little bit here. It's
Okay.
like, again, James assumed in all cases that such voices had been auditory hallucinations, and he did not seem to like entertaining the idea that more than just voices might have been part of such experiences. He notes that, Julian James, if we could say that ancient Egypt had a psychology, we would then have to say that its fundamental notion is the ka. And the problem becomes what the ka is.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We can imagine a worker out in the field suddenly hearing the ka or hallucinated voice of the vizier over him, admonishing him in some way. This only works if you're talking about real information. If this guy's tripping this stuff, then he's going to end up doing stupid things out there in the field, right? And it's like nobody's going to be happy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what he's saying is that, like, the supervisor could be doing up some kind of a spreadsheet in his office while his ka is out there bossing, people.
Yeah. That's crazy.
So in other words, I don't have this problem of not being able to be in two places at one time. That's easy.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what we're reading here.
Sure, that changes everything.
Yeah. If after he returned to his city, he told the vizier he had heard the vizier's ka, which in actuality there'd be no reason for his doing. The vizier, were he conscious as we are, would assume that it was the same voice that he himself heard, in which directed his life, right? Whereas, you see, James is not entertaining the idea that, like, you could be talking about real information here, and this whole thing could have been real. Whereas in actuality, to the worker in the field, the vizier's ka sounded like the vizier's own voice, while to the vizier himself, his ka would speak in the voice of authorities over him.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
This
says go ahead, keep going. I'll wait till you're done before I bring up my point.
As a modern scholar committed to an evolutionist worldview, could ever come to understanding what was going on in Egypt some 3,000 or 4,000 years ago. We assume that an Egyptian of the Old Kingdom would have explained the situation somewhat differently.
Mm-hmm.
Here's what the Egyptian of the Old Kingdom would have said. Jehoshaphat was out doing those new fences in the field, and he didn't know exactly how to run that north row, and the boss was busy with that report to the vizier, so the boss sent his ka out there to set Joe straight. Okay?
Yeah.
That would be the 2019 version. You understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
So you're talking about a radically different kind of reality. You're talking about, like, how in the world does somebody from our age understand something like this?
Yeah, that's pretty hard to wrap your head around.
Right. Now, let me tell you something else. Okay, I'm going to leave this at this point, right? I'm going to say, hey, anybody who wants to can come read the rest of this, right?
Okay.
The word ka is an Egyptian word which we could try to think of in terms of spirit, right?
Right.
And Hugh Crosthwaite and Altagracia sort of interpret ka as spirit, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, we've mentioned this little thing which Israelites called the Ark of the Covenant.
Yeah.
And if you didn't know better, and if your main of the book that you read most of the time was the Old Testament of the Bible, You think, well, it must be that Israelites were the only people that ever had one of those.
Right.
That's what you would think, right?
Mm-hmm.
Aldegracia says no. He said that these things, he said the word ka became a common word around the Mediterranean basin. So everybody borrowed the word, right? And
Okay.
that people in Italy and the Etruscans and in other parts of the other, well, I mean, you read the Bible and it appears as if other people living in the immediate neighborhood of the Israelites didn't have these, right?
No.
Other people did. It's like Aldegracia says the Etruscans had these things. They call them kamir, which means spirit catcher, right?
Mm-hmm.
We use that same word today, camera, right?
Right.
For
Right.
almost exactly the
Yeah.
same thing.
There's no, I want them to see the words too, you know.
Right, right.
Yeah. So, all right. Yeah, that's good, Ted. It was very interesting. A lot of new things to chew on for me. It was
Right.
interesting. Yeah, I enjoyed it.
And I have the computer in front of me, and I don't think that my voice might have been
No,
fading
your
out.
voice sounded stellar. I thought,
It comes in a bottle, like with tiny little pellets.
yeah.
It's
Oh,
so,
bioplasma. Yeah,
I'm sorry.
bioplasma, the cell salts.
Yeah, cell salts, and it comes in little tiny cubes,
Yeah.
and they seem solid to the touch, right? But they absolutely just melt and disintegrate in your mouth.
Yeah, you put it under your tongue. It's sublingual. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Put it.
I don't have any idea how many of those to take ever, right? It's
You
like,
could take two to three times a day.
okay,
Yeah, that's what it says on the website. Two to three times a day, whatever you want.
okay. I'm just like
You
whenever I
can't
felt
overdose on it. You just pee out anything extra. So
right. No, that's
yeah,
great
and
stuff.
it's. Did you read the freaking comments from people like what it's done for them and shit? It's crazy.
No,
It even healed somebody's tooth. Major connection between your dental health and your health of your body. The, I don't know, Aquafina, stuff like that. It's cheap. You got to get the good water, like smart water. It's 7.4 pH.
oh, I've got one of those Berkey filters, and I can just
Yeah,
take water
yeah,
all
me too.
over
Yeah,
my house.
yeah,
You know.
yeah. The fluoride is bad for you too. They
Oh
say it's
yeah,
good for your teeth, but it's not.
we're living in some weird times, man. I mean, it's
Oh,
like,
I know, I know. Tell me about it.
I mean, it looks to me like there's a good chance some of these fools involved in this coup attempt are going to go to prison. I would love to see this guy Brennan go to prison. I
Oh
hope.
yeah. Well, I heard that there was an 80-year-old guy who was collecting rainwater in California, and he went to prison. They
Yeah.
told him that's crazy.
Oh, look, I'm talking about bad people not going to prison. That's,
Yeah, I know,
I've
I
had
know.
over
But
the
I'm just
years,
saying that's what it's come to. You can't even collect rainwater anymore.
yeah, I know I've had over the years people, headhunters calling me about jobs in California, right? And they act like they're in a state of shock to hear there's anybody in the world that doesn't want to live in California. I said, you've got
Oh
to,
yeah, they can keep it.
you know,
Yeah.
absolutely no use for that place. I don't even like setting foot in the place, you know.
I hear you, man. It could fall into the sea any minute.
Well, it might, but
Yeah, you never know.
the biggest disaster that could occur really would be that magna plume in Yellowstone if that were to blow somehow or
Oh
other.
man, I know. I know. There's a fire under the earth that we just can't. We have no control of.
Let me tell
Anytime
you
it.
something you do. Let me tell you something you can control. I'm telling everybody to collect like about 6 months worth of very cheap, simple food,
Yeah, I read that. Yeah.
rice, rice and
Yes.
beans, and
Yes.
every kind of thing like that, and macaroni
Yeah.
and stuff to flavor all that stuff, right? And
Hmm.
just well, because you don't know what the hell is going to happen, like with a situation like
No.
the like an I don't know what you want to call it, right?
Solar flare or
No, no, no. Talking about all this flooding.
yeah, the flooding and there's all kinds of things going on.
Okay, the flooding is basically misplaced priorities on the part of government, right? I mean, they should have been building infrastructure for the last 50 years.
Hmm.
Haven't been. And you've got like a whole list of a couple of hundred different Army Corps of Engineer projects which have been recommended, which everybody is just which has been presented to the government as like, you really have to have this shit. Oh, no, we don't want to do that. We want to we want to be building weapons, right?
Yeah,
And Donald Trump is trying to put a stop to that shit, right? I mean, Donald Trump is, up until now hasn't had the room to try to set up try to make any kind of reasonable arrangements with China and Russia, right? Everybody's talking about the guy being a communist agent or something, or a Russian agent. I mean,
No, that's ridiculous.
Well,
It's
I know
ridiculous.
that shit to rest. Have you ever seen my little,
What's that?
have you ever seen my own little my own little thing about Russian collusion?
No, I haven't.
Oh, give me a second. While we're still here, and
Well, yeah, because I'm getting pretty tired.
there's one thing, okay?
All right. I'm going to stop the recording, or do you want me to keep it on, or what?
No, stop the recording.
Okay. All right. Yeah, okay. Thanks, Ted. I had a good time, man. And, we'll talk soon.
Good enough. I'll catch up with you later next week. It's like always a pleasure. Let me catch you a bit later here.
Same here, buddy. Okay, take care now.
Take care. Bye.